Good morning, everyone. Let's begin now that we are reaching 10 a.m. Central Time. I want to welcome you to our Hubert Project webinar on using high-quality multimedia learning materials for human services. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shannon Evans, and I'm from the Hubert Project, the multimedia learning repository that we'll be introducing you to today. We want to thank Christine Robinson, the one who likely invited you to this session, for opening the dialogue with you today. Before I dive into the purpose, quickly want to share with you our motivation for today. As I said, we are a free, high-quality learning resource available to help you with training and professional development in your agency and or network. Our learning materials are developed for trainers, consultants, and professors around the world, but as it has grown, we realize it has relevance to spark important conversations in the nonprofit management team meetings. We hope this webinar and conversation will help you bring professional development ideas back to your agency and network. So the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce you all to the Hubert Project, highlight materials and provide examples of use, and invite dialogue, including new ideas you may have for the learning material collection. Just a quick housekeeping matter. I want to encourage you to use the chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, which most of you have been using already. My colleague Kate will be monitoring the chat and interrupting Jody and I throughout the webinar if you have a question. So to begin, I want to introduce you to the Hubert Project team. Like I said, my name is Shannon Evans, and I primarily project manage the production of Hubert learning materials, as well as marketing, communications, and strategic management. I'm going to be facilitating our discussion today. I also want to introduce you to Kate Connors. She is the Technology Enhanced Learning Coordinator at the Humphrey School and the technology person for the Hubert Project. As I said, she'll be monitoring the chat, so be in touch with her if you have a specific question. Throw out your question and she'll be interrupting us. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Jody to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jody Sanford, and in just a minute, I'm going to activate my video. I'm the founder and academic director of the Hubert Project, and I'm also here on the faculty at the Public Policy School at the University of Minnesota. I come to this work with many years in the nonprofit sector, as well as years working with and consulting with foundations. And as you'll see in a minute, part of the motivation for this initiative is realizing that we don't have as many great quality materials for training and professional development in human service organizations as we should. And so the Hubert Project in many ways is trying to fill that gap.
Great, thanks, Jody. Now we would love for you to introduce yourselves to the group. If you can do so in the chat box, please share your name, organization, the role you play, and let us know any questions you might have for us today that we can try to sneak into our agenda. I'll give you just a minute to do this and to read everyone else's responses.
Okay,
so Nicola shared with us that she's from Rhode Island Legal Services, Inc. in the HR department. Catherine is joining us from the Crittenton Women's Union. She's a VP of operations. I apologize if I pronounce your names incorrectly. John Bunsey is a research associate and evaluator at Eastern Michigan. Thank you, Catherine, for corrections, programs and operations. Tiffany is joining us from Rhode Island Legal Services as well. She is a financial officer. So it looks like we have a pretty wide variety of folks coming to us from research, HR, finance. It's a great group.
Well, and it's a great group given the diversity and the well-known nature of many of what people are doing.
Exactly. I'll give you all 10 more seconds.
People sharing this helps me to better understand what parts of the collection I can highlight as we go through.
Definitely. We'll keep adding in those questions as you have them.
So, Shannon, are we ready to begin?
Yes, just one moment. All right, I'm going to pass things off to you, Jody.
Okay, great, thanks. So when we thought about what might be helpful for a webinar like this, we thought that we should go through pretty much 4 key questions. What's the project? What kinds of learning materials are available to people like you? What are some examples of relevant human service management and leadership content topics? And thinking about how these might be relevant to your organizations and the training and the program development that you're doing. So to begin, the first question is really, what is this thing called the Hubert Project? It's an initiative that is 4 years old, and we're really focused on promoting interactive learning in public affairs, nonprofit management, and leadership through building and sharing these multimedia learning materials. And as I suggested in my introduction, part of the motivation for this was realizing in my own professional practice that there was a lot of innovation that was going on in nonprofit organizations that was pretty invisible. It didn't appear in the way we do training in higher education. It would be something that some people would have a sense, wow, somebody at this nonprofit, maybe the Crichton program, because I've heard a lot about what you do, is doing something innovative, but what's really going on there? In addition, because in the nonprofit sector, we kind of function oftentimes by word of mouth, opportunities to pause and do some in-depth learning with a situation seem to be really valuable. And the internet provides us with an array of multimedia tools that we can use to help capture those stories and share them for learning purposes. So when I think about the roles you all are playing in organizations, or John, a little less so for you because I imagine part of what you do is some training. For you, it's helpful in any kind of teaching and training setting. But for those of you who are managing staff or working with networks, the materials we've developed are really useful to introduce some core concepts that could be relevant to your mission or strategy and kind of bringing everybody up to the same level to have a conversation about government nonprofit relationships, for example, or collaborative strategy or policy field dynamics. They're relevant if you want to introduce a new tool or practice to the agency, and I'll show you an example of one of those materials in a second around estimating true program costs. And then third of all, the materials are really helpful when you want to spark some different kinds of discussion with your staff about a challenging issue, about ethics maybe, or politics or values, that rather than pointing your finger at one person, it allows you to have a third thing. Something out there, a case that you can discuss in a more neutral way, but hopefully allows you to build more challenge or more skill among your staff in learning how to deal with it. That academic term is adaptive challenges, and these are the ones where there's not really a easy quick fix, but that the skill of the situation requires navigating the politics and the culture and other things. One of the things I think that might be helpful is that these materials are things you can think of as portable learning objects. And these are, it's a terminology that's taking hold in higher education. It really creates this third thing for you to interact with, facilitate a staff meeting conversation, or facilitate a meeting of a committee, and really try to get at effective learning for adults. All of the materials are Creative Commons, and that means that the authors have said that they want people to use them for free and that people can take pieces of them and use them in unexpected ways. These are also what's called open educational resources, so things that are open in the web, focused on people and adult learning. There's a lot of science behind what we're trying to do, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them for our conversation. So one of the things that research is showing us in the last 15 years is that grown-ups have very set brain structures, and it's caused by experience and the things that we know from our lived day-to-day work trying to solve problems. What that means for learning, though, is that grown-ups need to have some powerful learning materials, and that's why experience is often such an important way of shaping learning. The challenge becomes, of course, when experience doesn't actually take you where you need it to go, or it maybe takes you to always doing the same old thing rather than innovating. And so the kinds of materials that we've tried to create in this collection enable more deep learning through the use of audio, video, things that are relevant, that kind of replicate practice. It's kind of a medium ground between a conventional academic material and something that's just based in experience. And what we're trying to do with the materials is to enable people to have some really deep learning, to challenge their tacit knowledge, what they know that they don't even know, as well as what they think they know, their more explicit knowledge. One of the other pieces I wanted to point out is that it's really important in roles of leadership, if you're using these materials or in a training or teaching role, to think about how do you want to facilitate people's engagement with them. One of the powers of video is that it shows emotional content. That's why in this webinar, you could have a little bit of a sense, hopefully, of my engagement and my interest in this topic because of my cues that I'm giving you via video. It also allows people to identify with the protagonists. A number of the leaders in our materials are women. Many of them are people of color. We're trying to give a real rich picture of who are the leaders that are driving human service innovation in the sector. So, and that helps people have a more significant learning experience when they see materials that relate to their lived context. It allows them to engage. So the second question we wanted to explore is what's available. And in a minute, I'm going to go through each of these. But we have video briefs, which are really short introductory materials. E-studies, which is a collection of things related to a management quandary or a tool, and e-cases, which are a little bit more in-depth investigations of these quandaries, these knotty problems. But before I go on, maybe I will direct your attention to the chat window. Kate had said, are there any questions? Chat, type in any questions if you have them at this point before we start going in and showcasing a little bit of what each of these materials look like in practice. Okay, we're going to keep moving, but again, we're actively managing that chat box. And so dive in if you have a question. So the first material that we have is a video brief, and Shannon is going to pull up for us an example of one. And this one happens to focus on government-nonprofit relationships. And again, it's something that you could use, these video briefs, to introduce a key concept in a strategy meeting or for a staff meeting. Okay, so obviously that little video brief is something that's common that you can see often in YouTube. But one of the things that we discovered is that there's often not content that's kind of at the core of human service operations. So this one on government nonprofit relationships, for example, it was impossible to find anything that could spark a conversation about why is it difficult sometimes when you're working with government and you're moving from an advocacy role into one when you're receiving a contract or a grant. And so the materials that we've developed in these video briefs really are trying to get at the essence of government nonprofit relationships. Some of the other topics that you see here are listed on the screen. We've also begun to try to delve into cross-cultural communications. And so there's a little quick video about the clothes I wear, looking at the various ways that people present and how their clothes makes people make assumptions about who they are and what kind of cultural background do they come from. So there's a potentially endless array of video briefs that could be developed. And one of the things we're interested in is hearing from you about topics that you think are really central to human service delivery. The second material are e-studies, and these are either a curation of publicly available material or original content around a timely management issue or management tool or method. So some of them are really useful in higher education. We have one about controversies in fund development or social media with the Komen case, for example. The one that's up on the screen in front of you now is an e-study that we've just completed that looks at the process of trying to develop true program cost. As you can see on the screen, it has multiple components to it, and that's really one of the things we're very proud of the Hubert project. These aren't one or two dimensional webinars. There's a video on the screen where the executive director of the Nonprofits Assistance Fund lays out why true program costs are critical. And she basically said, you know, in nonprofits, we run a lot of programs. We're very focused on trying to secure resources for our programs, but we often forget about the business capacity that we need to combine with the mission. And part of that hinges on knowing how much in each program actually costs. So if you're running a tutoring program, you need to know how much the staff, the directors, the materials, the space, the internet, and overhead costs really all combine because true costs matter. It's not that every program needs to cover its cost, but that knowledge is power in nonprofit management. Then the e-case allows you to navigate into a few different things, and Shannon's going to walk us through that. So at the very top, there is the roadmap of the overall framing of how would you walk an organization through really investigating their true program costs. So gathering the information, doing the calculations, and then garnering insights. And so this little handout helps you introduce the concept to your staff and to say, okay, we're going to all be involved in gathering information. We're all going to be involved in insights, but maybe just one or two of our staff members is going to be involved in the calculation. Then in the first module of the e-case, we actually go over, it includes the step-by-step approach. So defining your programs, doing the accounting details, thinking about direct and indirect costs. So each of these buttons has a different topic that allows that people who are using the e-study can dive into. So let's go and look into the direct and indirect costs. This part of the e-study actually brings in a real-life organization that's gone through this process, again with a video. And then in addition to the testimony of an executive director of a cultural center, it provides some handouts. So ways of actually doing the direct and indirect cost calculations, something that you can print and share with your staff from the e-case itself. It also provides a white paper from the author of this e-study talking about the various instructions to utilize some of the worksheets that they've provided on direct and indirect cost. Then in the e-study, there also allows you to go back to this module and all of these topics, all of which have similar kinds of information kind of embedded in it. So it really helps bring the tool to life and allows it to be transported to other locations without always having the content expert there to do the training. The third module, or the second module in this case, goes into, again, some more video from the executive director, talks about some more white papers that they've created about program allocations and cost budgeting. And then also on this page, there is a link to a webinar training that the content author has done. And so part of why we included this is that it's not that e-studies are to supplement webinars. Sometimes your accountant in this example needs to go through and really dig into all of these worksheets and Excel files that are available in the e-study. A webinar might be a way to do that. What the e-study does is it allows the tool to be understandable to a larger proportion of your staff. So again, it's the e-study you can share with all of your staff when you want to introduce the topic of program costs. And you can then allocate certain staff to play certain roles, but it really allows more of your senior management team to have an understanding about why you would be going through this level of training, and to feel confident that they can dig into it at whatever level that they desire. So we have a number of different e-studies that are really useful and relevant to human services field. And Shannon, if you want to advance it to the next slide, we have one on community engagement in Detroit, and how organizers provided some ways of really engaging Detroit in trying to develop its own economic development. There's resources there on making evaluation customizable to your context. We're really interested in giving people more tools about funding. So in addition to the true program costs I just shared with you, there's resources about how do you make decisions about the relative autonomy and reliability in your funding pool. We've recently just completed some materials about board facilitation and board engagement, design thinking, and different kinds of strategies for understanding how your organization or your program fits into a larger policy field. And so again, these e-studies are really there to introduce a new management tool, a new concept, and spark discussion and dialogue. Kate, it looks like Catherine McKay has her hand up. Do you know what the question is? I see she says we have poor sound, so I'll hold my mic a little bit closer.
I think your sound is great, Jody. Catherine, if you can try turning up your audio as much as you can, that should help. I'm sorry for the trouble.
The third and final product that's available in the Hubert collection is called an e-case. And this is actually where we started. We wanted to tell multimedia stories about the dilemmas of practice, and where you really require the user to grapple with a strategic decision, or why would we do that, or what issues might be addressed. These are these adaptive challenges that are a little knotty and problem to actually help people develop more of a sense of strategy. And so in this particular example, it looks at the development of the person-centered care movement in aging services. And you can see again that the landing page has a photograph of kind of some of the actors involved. It sets the context with a little bit of text. And then module 1 has a slightly different format than the e-case or the e-study that we showed. So Shannon, do you want to dive into module 1 for us? here it basically lays out the background of the case, which is that there was really a movement, has been a movement in long-term care to become much more patient-centered, and it pushes against the assumptions of medical expertise. Congress responded, so a little background on that, talks about the various movements and how it was spreading, and then kind of culminated in parts of the Affordable Care Act that really reflects this overall movement. So that's the first module of this case. The second module then drills more into, so how did they make this cultural shift in this large human services field? So it goes through, well, what are the various approaches, the mission, the values, some models, as well as some of the findings of the research. So again, trying to give people some access to what are the key resources that implementation actors in making this shift did. So research in the slide in front of you is very important. So again, what the e-case is trying to do is to walk somebody through understanding a third system that they may not be a part of, but to allow you to have dialogue about, well, what about the person-centered care movement might be relevant to our challenges that we face in homelessness, or in working with low-income women to help get them employed, or in doing legal services. So it's really trying to help people build different kinds of critical thinking skills. We have a lot of other topics that focus on human services as their setting in this collection because of the support of the Kresge Foundation. So we have materials on mergers in children's services, and what does it take for two separate organizations to really come together and make a decision about merging, and then what does it take to actually do it? Number of cases about scaling programs, because that's such a question, both in supportive housing and in Latina domestic violence agencies. Collective impact is a buzzword, but again, what does it really take to carry this out? There's a case that we have in our collection about scaling education using a collective impact model. There's a lot on government nonprofit relationships, as is suggested by the video brief that I shared, in part because scholars and practitioners know that this relationship with government is so critical in human services agencies. So one of the cases is the El Centro de la Raza, 40-year-old organization in Seattle that does home ownership services, but they're really struggling to work with government because of their real affiliation with the Latino community. Or the Office of Economic Opportunity here in Minnesota that has a really unique partnership with a network of nonprofits. There are many, many other topics, as you can see here on the screen, and we're going to be completing this webinar and sending you direct links to some of these materials because we're hoping that some of you will find them really useful and relevant to using with your staff. And as always, we're interested in learning more about any other topics that you think would be important. So to engage with the Hubert community, the first thing is to browse and use the collection. And in a second, Shanna's going to show you how to do that. If you register on the site, you can download the materials into any kind of web platform. For those of you in higher education, it goes into any course management software. It can be put on a server, or you could stream it live from the Hubert Project site. One of the things that motivated this project from the beginning, again, was trying to capture the lessons of practice and have those materials accessible to people around the country and around the globe. And one of the things we've really been able to do is to leverage context in higher education. We're doing a lot of training of faculty and trainers in public policy and nonprofit management schools at various national conferences. And so if one of the things you're interested in is having a Hubert Project material based on your context, your case, or an interest in a knotty problem or management tool you think is useful, consult with us. People have had consultants be the content experts or faculty members. We do training for them and they can become Hubert Fellows. And we can really help them in a pretty easy way, not requiring a lot of technological know-how, enable them to have the ability to build a material. And each material has a usage note for facilitators and trainers. And so we really want people to both build materials, and we help to make sure that they're used by teachers and trainers across the country. And then finally, we'd love you to suggest new topics. It might be that you don't have a consultant or a story you want to tell through a Hubert Fellow, but you know that you guys are really struggling with X, Y, or Z. And the recent products we've been developing because of the Kresge investment has really been trying to pivot from suggestions we've heard from people like you. So Shannon, why don't you show the people how to search for materials?
Definitely. So I have logged on to hubertproject.org, and quickly, without even having to register or make an account with us, you can browse the collection at the top there where it says Browse Collection. On the right-hand column, you'll see a search tool where you can search by organization, setting, and sector, by skills area, and by material type. And so, for example, I'm going to search for a multi-service organization setting, and I'm interested in finance. And I'll hit search. And 3 materials matched that criteria exactly. If I would have just hit, multi-service organizations and hit search, I would have had a much larger return, but I really drilled in on finance. The other way you can do it from any page on our site, if you're looking around at our workbooks and templates, on the right-hand column, you'll find a magnifying glass. You can look for materials at any point, anywhere on the site, and you'll find the same search field there. If you're interested in staying in touch with us and joining our newsletter, which I hope you are, at the bottom of the page, you'll find a space for you to enter your email address, and that will automatically keep you up to date with our monthly newsletter. You can also register at the top right and log in on the left. This will, as Jody mentioned, this will allow you to download any of our materials if you're a member. And if you're not a member yet, you can register on the right-hand column. This is really helpful for us to hear where you're coming from. We're really interested in learning more about our members, so we would definitely appreciate it if you would enroll with us. And I'll pass it off to you, Jody.
So our fourth and final question of this webinar was really, how might you use the materials? And so, as I mentioned, we initially created these materials for people who run teaching or training cohorts. So many times participants in those training programs are assigned one of these materials to view before the training seminar or before the workshop. And they become what an article used to be. Something to spark your interest. So we used to always, use Nonprofit Quarterly articles or Stanford Social Innovation Review articles. Well, this allows you to drill into a specific tool a little bit more detailed and really see how the idea hits in real organizations, because so many of the e-cases and the e-studies really highlight how the idea hits in a place. For those of you who are running organizations, I really think that sometimes these materials could be a discussion starter. In boards of directors that I'm on, I'm really struck by how diverse the board members are in terms of their understanding and experience of human service agencies, working with government, finding money, dealing with knotty problems. And so these materials, again, by providing that third thing, they allow everybody to start on kind of a equal playing field. We also would love you to send the link to any of your staff and really encourage people to investigate these things. The website is fairly interactive, and so when people are using the materials, they can make comments about their use and really kind of engage in the global community of Hubert users. I think that there's a number of tools in here now in the e-studies that really teach a particular tool or particular skill set. And again, a little bit deeper than a webinar, that really allows a team to wrap their arms around what are the steps involved in doing something like estimating true program cost, for example, or doing a more culturally appropriate evaluation design. As I mentioned, these are great resources for cohort-based trainings. And again, just inviting you to introduce these materials to any of your networks of people who run such training programs, because they're a free and valuable resource that are really trying to represent the perspective of the nonprofit sector and the managers and leaders here. So would be happy to answer any questions. The message board or the chat board on this particular webinar has been pretty quiet. But at this point, we are happy to answer questions. We just thank you for engaging this morning with all the busy things that you can do. And please engage with us. We really are aligned with you in wanting to improve human service delivery and marshal all the resources we have, because the people who work for you are some of our best and most important resources. So Shannon and I and Kate will stay on the line, and we're happy to interact around any questions you might have.
Mm-hmm. And while you're thinking of those questions, I just want to mention that there will also be a recording of the webinar, a copy of the PowerPoint, and a resource page for you to download that we'll be sending. You'll get that from Christine Robinson at the Kresge Foundation the next day or two. So I'll just leave the space open to see if we have any questions that come up. And again, I encourage you to go to hubertproject.org and create an account with us, or email us at info@hubertproject.org if you have any specific questions after this. And of course, tweet at Hubert Project. We'd love to connect with you over Twitter. Well, Jody and Kate will stay online, but just want to thank you again for joining us today. Please stay in touch, and we'll be